Welcome to a special combined edition of your three favourite podcast series, Inside Employment, Inside IR and Inside Safety by Herbert Smith Freehills Kramer, exploring the latest developments in Australian employment, IR and safety law and practice. Hello and welcome to a special edition of our Herbert Smith Freehills Kramer podcasts to kick off 2026, our 2026 Tips and Traps edition, where we combine your three favourite podcasts of Inside Employment, Inside Safety and Inside IR to deliver you with our thoughts on tips for employers heading into 2026. What are the key issues that you're going to confront and what are the risks and opportunities for you heading into the new year? My name is Rohan Doyle. I'm a partner in the industrial relations practice at Herbert Smith Freehills Kramer, and I'm joined today by two of my fellow colleagues and partners, Steve Bell and Natalie Gaspar. Welcome, Steve and Nat.
Hi, Happy New Year.
Hey team.
Happy New Year. Good to be back. Suspiciously in the same clothing as our end of year wrap edition, but we won't read too much into that at all.
Absolutely no way is it still 2025 while we're recording that. It's true.
Before we begin, two very quick observations from me. One, in case our listeners and watchers didn't watch our end of year wrap edition, we're combining our
Hard
podcasts.
to imagine, but it's possible.
It is possible. We are combining our podcasts together for a very good reason. And that reason is because over the course of 2025, what we noticed is an increasing overlap between the issues that our respective practices deal with in the employment, safety and IR space. And there's an increasing need for practitioners to actually have some skill and experience in each of those areas in solving increasingly complex workplace problems. And you'll see that in our tips that we have in store for you today for 2026, a lot of crossover in those. The second observation I wanted to make is that after a fairly turbulent couple of years in the employment, IR and safety space through legislative change, lots of changes in how the market deals with issues and the like, what we've seen increasingly is the value of preparation, in being able to scan the horizon, know what's coming at you, and actually dedicate some time and resources to being ready for it. And those that do that, it's very obvious, they achieve better outcomes. They also have a much calmer and peaceful existence. So that's what we're aiming to give you today, a forward look at the issues that are coming up in 2026, our thoughts on how you might invest your time in dealing with those. So Nat, let's get straight into it. We'll start with you. What does 2026 hold in store in the employment space?
There's a bit to do in terms of payroll compliance, team. I'm afraid to say it's not going away. And I think there's...
So boring though, isn't it? but important.
Do we have to?
I'm afraid so. So I think there's a couple of things that you and your organisation can have a think about to prepare yourself for this. So one is record keeping. Traditionally, and in some sectors and organisations, there has been a less robust, perhaps is a way to put it, in terms of record-keeping obligations for employees who are covered by a modern award but receive an annual salary. So these are professional, paraprofessional, people who work in offices and the like who have enjoyed a bit of agency and flexibility in their days. It is a very worthwhile, indeed necessary investment to have some thinking in relation to how and when those employees work, frameworks in relation to working of overtime and the authorisation of overtime. It is not going to go away, that space. That has been an obligation that has existed since the Fair Work Act came into existence, but given the focus in that space, not just from regulator activity and underpayment claims, but for businesses who are looking to buy or sell, we are seeing from a deal perspective that W&I insurers, that purchasers of prospective businesses, this is absolutely on their radar. Insurers are not insuring for risk in this space. They effectively want some certainty. So that if it is not already in place is one that is worthy of some thinking and investment. Now, related to the payroll compliance piece, we are in a world where there are federal wage theft laws. I think, again, a piece of work that I think is a worthy investment is making sure that the organisation has a process and system and framework in place so that individual queries in relation to payroll compliance, grievances and the like are escalated and dealt with centrally, and so that those aren't either papered over or dismissed as a one-off incident, so that there can be exploration as to whether this is a systemic issue And so that an individual manager, for example, their actions in dealing with these sorts of things aren't attributed to the corporate criminal conduct of the employer. So there is a piece there, and relatedly, it might be individual managers saying, "Oi, Rohan, can you work a bit of overtime, but just clock off and get it done for me?" So those sorts of behaviours and systems, that there is a piece about regularising that from a governance perspective. Now, I'm going to pass to you, Steve, because the other tip is more broadly in relation to wage compliance, the due diligence aspect and how that is filtered up at executive and board level.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, just fascinating observation. Officers for a decade or more under work health and safety laws have owed a positive duty to exercise due diligence over work health and safety. My strong sense is if you are doing now what you were doing for your board a decade ago, you're out of step with contemporary expectations. It's really interesting to hear your points about the canary in the coal mine. What does this single instance of an employee concern about a wage matter tell you about the system as a whole? I think those expectations remain true in relation to psychosocial risk, in relation to respect at work or sexual harassment risk in the workplace, in relation to overall psychosocial safety of workers. So the tone and the language and the level of detail of governance, expectations and reporting and structures across industry probably needs a refresh. That would be, my sort of leading suggestion, I think. And I only say this for a few reasons. One, I think expectations have moved on. I do get to talk to boards quite a lot, and the directors I deal with now are less interested in the figures that show, injury rates. They want to see that, I suppose, because it gives them some comparative basis. What they really want is insight. What they really want is a sense of strategy, a sense of implementation, a sense of resourcing, and how we're tracking in relation to the efforts that have been made across the business. And most, box standard health and safety board reports probably haven't dealt with that at a level of detail that's meeting the need. So there's a pull factor. Directors and executives need and want more assurance across a breadth of the sorts of employment and industrial matters and safety matters we're going to talk about. And secondly, when I say clients facing regulatory investigations, the tone and expectation of the local inspectorate in terms of what they think a board or an executive are told about operational decisions that have been made in the business across my area, but I suspect across yours too, really heightened. And again, you're not solving this through reporting. This isn't about a paper trail per se, but demonstrating that level of engagement and insight is really important. So for me, there's a synergy here, I think, like it or not. The executive teams and the boards of our clients and those listening on this podcast are amping up year on year. There's an extra set of directors' duties. Every time I do a presentation, there's an extra set of obligations, an extra regulator, an extra set of governance expectations. And so tip number one for me, thinking about 2026, is what you're doing for those senior leaders in your organisation good enough? And if you are a director or an executive listening to this call, are you getting what you need? And maybe not. And that's no bad question to ask. And asking for that review and that refresh, I think, is helpful. Now, I spoke about psych safety. I think if I was to lead into a discussion with you, Rohan, about one of the factors that I'd really encourage industrial relations and safety teams to be engaging in relation to, it's this idea of consultation in relation to the impact of change, what that means, what it means in restructures, what it means in reorganisations. Because even if we're forecasting what's coming up in 2026, it seems to me lots of businesses are going to go through some sort of reform process to introduce new technology, make a restructure, make some trim. So what would you say about that, Ro?
Yeah, it also happens to be my number one tip for 2026. There is going to be lots more of that change type work coming at us, whether it's due to introduction of AI, other technologies, or other economic pressures. We're already seeing that come through. And so I think given the suite of obligations that employers have, psychosocial risk, consultation, general protections, really important that employers, particularly HR, IR practitioners, spend some time off the ball, so to speak, outside of these specific projects. Actually have a plan, have a template as to how you will implement and roll out these projects, because the obligations broadly, they're the same every time. Yes, they get rolled out in slightly different ways depending on the nature of the project, but you can actually do a lot of that work in advance outside of projects. It's a much safer way to do it. Make sure all the people that need to know their roles, know what their obligations are, and have a suite of documents ready to roll out. It just also enables you to do that work in an environment without the time pressure.
Yep.
Because we know as soon as a workplace change decision is made, all these obligations come on essentially immediately.
Yeah.
And Steve, psychosocial risk consultation, that is now essentially the first step.
Yeah, that's right.
Much better placed if the organisation knows how they're going to, as far as practicable, mitigate those risks to psychosocial risk in the context of those projects.
But it's challenging, right, for the reasons you just described, because typically a lot of business thinking is done, comms are prepared, the proposed change is announced, that starts the clock. But as you've just said, there's an expectation that you've done some thinking ahead of time. So your point about pre-consulting on a generalised framework for how you manage change, I think is really important from a health and safety regulatory point of view to get ahead of that curve. And then, as you say, once the starting pistol's been fired, you think about whether it's still fit for purpose. But I think that's really good advice.
But not only that, also making sure that senior leaders within the business are cognizant of these obligations because they impact the timeframes in which HR and IR need to implement these projects. There's often a disconnect between that understanding at the sort of senior executive level and HR, IR. So worth getting ahead on those issues. Nat, what do you have for us, number 2?
My next one is that there is going to be an inflection point at some stage this year which will invite or indeed necessitate a review of your temporary employment contracts and even your release agreements. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. There is floated, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like yet. Things like a prohibition on post-employment restraints for certain employees. I expect that we will receive some clarity at a judicial level with respect to concepts such as set-off and the like. As you're listening to this, we expect that it will be law that in Victoria there will be prohibitions like we've seen in the United Kingdom on the use of non-disclosure agreements for individuals who've experienced sexual harassment. Now, that I think invites a review of your standard template release agreements just to ensure that that matches the legislation. Now, most of you listening into this pod will have multi-jurisdictional operations, but the changes in Victoria will lift things to this high watermark, I think, across the organisation. So I think there's a bit of just back to basics, reviewing your standard contract terms to deal with those things.
Yep.
It's really an annual thing to do these days, isn't it? There's just so much change.
It is. That's right.
Number 2 for me, Rohan, would be I think there's more work that needs to be done across most businesses in relation to thinking through the integration of psychosocial risk management, so that is non-physical risk management, into the way that different functions operate: the HR team, the workers' comp team, the reportable conduct hotline, the executive team, the sorts of reporting and information that's available, the toolkit that people are providing senior leaders in the organisation or people leaders at all to have some language around psychosocial risk. So it's not seen as some disproportionate event, so that there's a toolkit for dealing with issues, there's a response kit available, there's escalation pathways in the organisation. I think all of that is really important. Probably, we've sort of scratched the surface, I think, on this. Is probably, if you're listening to this and you're reasonably well advanced, you've gone through a process of developing a policy on these issues, having a risk assessment, thinking about training. I have a strong sense that this next year is going to be a kind of a new wave of sophistication and integration on these sorts of issues. It's important. It's important because there's a real chance to do some good in relation to all of this. But I think it's important because the standards that are being expected from the workforce, from the community and from regulators are not getting lower, they're getting higher. And so there's a real focus on that. But one of the things I know that we've dealt with is the standards that are expected of senior leaders in organisations post the Coldplay concert, that really there's been a massive change about what it is that's tolerable at a workplace. And my experience is you get jammed on decision-making on some of these quite complex issues really quickly. It comes off on boards and it comes off on executive teams. So I don't know if you're recommending clients need to do some wargaming of this, need to do some thinking in advance.
Absolutely. This is one-on-one crisis management stuff where all the expertise in relation to health and safety incidents and response and environmental incidents and response, that same playbook, to be frank, applies in relation to these sorts of issues. Now, I mentioned in the pod for the end of year wrap last year that the impact on share price as a result of executive misconduct, or not even misconduct, just a lack of clarity in relation to what the expectations are. This sort of happens, news filters up, if it does, to the board at executive level, and it's a Thursday night, no one's sleeping. How do we respond to the media? What do we tell our employees? But importantly, I think it is just having a crystal clear view and focus as to organisationally what it is that you tolerate and what it is that you don't, and how you will deal with these sorts of things. And there needs to be consistency in that approach. So gone are the days, I think, where one was capable of papering over a misconduct issue because an executive was bringing in good business and the like. So there is a piece about getting that playbook and that crisis response management in place. Now, of course, before we get to that stage, that's reactive stuff, stopping it from happening in the first place. So it is, again, I'll lean to you, Steve, in all we know from a traditional risk-based thinking style in relation to the prevention of sexual harassment and sex-based discrimination in workplaces, but it is having a framework in place, making sure that the escalation measures are available to employees and appropriate. And indeed, one of the things that you and I, when we go speak to boards and executives about this sort of issue is, and it can be a little bit disconcerting, if you are doing good in this space, you will actually see an increase, perversely, in sexual harassment complaints. But that is a good thing. That means that employees feel comfortable to speak up. The escalation methods are working. But that sort of information needs to consistently get up to the executive and the board level, so that there is that diagnostic view at a macro level as to what the issues are within the organisation. So,
No, it's a great, I remember you and I being in an ELT meeting with a major employer, tens of thousands of workers, and the team had reported there'd been 2 or 3 sexual harassment complaints. I remember the MD responding and saying, that's a problem. That's a problem. It should be higher than that. If we're being told the experience rate is 1 in 3 women are experiencing sexual harassment, it can't be that we've only had 3 in our organisation. I want to know more. It's just interesting, I think, that tilt into the proactive duty as opposed to, thank God we don't have a complaint, we don't have to do anything. It's a new world order. And again, I suppose the observations I would make are that there's a continuum here. I won't use the word journey, but I think lots of organisations are on a journey here about their sophistication, the toolkit they've got for thinking through these things. And my prediction will be there'll be a lot more of that in 2026.
There's already a very common thread through all these tips, and that is a whole bunch of issues that could arise that cause a state of crisis, panic, immediate flurry of activity, need to deal with things urgently, that you can actually get ahead of and establish playbooks. These things happen all the time. Certainly what we deal with every day.
That's right.
So it's really worth getting ahead of these things and having a plan in place in advance.
So tell us your last one, Ro.
Well, that also aligns with my theme here. My last one is on bargaining. I'm going to deal with it in 2 parts. First, just quickly, multi-enterprise bargaining. I do think it's important that employers who, particularly those that have enterprise agreements, but including those who might not, assess your risk in that space. What is the likelihood, do you think, of a union looking to bring you into an enterprise agreement with other employers, unrelated entities or otherwise, and have a view as to what you're going to do about that? There are a whole range of things you can do. Having an in-term agreement is the best defence, but there are others. And it's best to have a view on that before you get hit with an application. Or worse, you don't get told about the application. Other people will get sucked into that, but you're the subject of a roping in application after the multi-EA is made. That's worse because you have no say in the negotiation of that agreement. You just have to deal with the terms that others have negotiated. So don't be surprised by this. My recommendation to IR and HR practitioners is be aware of it, assess your risk, have a rough idea as to what you will do if this issue arises.
And Rohan, question without notice, I think it's important as well there, from some organisations we hear, actually a multi-enterprise agreement's a good thing for us because it will bring our competitors up to level the playing field. I think there's a piece of work about understanding what it is to be brought into the multi-enterprise bargaining stream not just for the short-term period, but longer-term thinking in relation to that. What does it mean for the next 3, 5 and 10 years? I think there is occasionally a misjudgment of short-term pain, long-term gain sort of analysis in relation to the bargaining thinking in that space.
I agree. I hear that comment a lot. It's if that's you, if you think there might be some benefit in it, all I can suggest is that you properly
Chat to
test that. Chat to us. We've been involved in many of the early cases in this space, so we've got some good insights. But there is a lot of pain associated with that regime. The complexity in being brought together with people that are outside your organisation, have different views and approaches to things. Once you're in the system, it's hard to get out. Don't get me started on that, but
yes.
We can take that one offline for anyone interested in talking about it. But final point from me, more generally, bargaining. There still seems to be a pretty significant disconnect between senior leaders, executives, boards understanding of how difficult it is to actually bargain, how difficult it is to achieve reasonable outcomes and the reality of the situation. And I think, IR practitioners, HR practitioners who are experienced in the space get it. They know it's harder than it was pre-2022, but I'm still increasingly seeing some pretty mixed messages from leadership teams on the objectives for bargaining rounds. For example, we want you to achieve no site disruption, no industrial action, no adverse media comment, and we also would like you to hold rates and wages at a pretty even keel. Often those are competing objectives and you actually have to choose a pathway, to choose one path. If you want wage restraint, if you want substantial change to conditions to maximise productivity and efficiency, often you need to be comfortable with a period of disruption or industrial action or other cost that you need to buy out those conditions. Or an arbitration in the Fair Work Commission where you'll be put to prove the integrity of your negotiating position. Why is it reasonable? What evidence do you have that sits behind that? And I think there's still a lack of understanding, I think, at executive team level of the difficulties inherent in all of that.
I agree.
So my tip is get ahead of this. If you're likely to be in enterprise bargaining in 2026, there's a lot you can do to align stakeholders to increase the level of skill and understanding across the business on these issues and help people make an informed choice about which of these paths the business wants to take. Steve, any final tips from you?
No, that's all great advice. It's another jammed agenda for the year coming up. So I have some empathy for those listening in because everything we described is not business as usual, and business as usual fills most people's plates. But I do think time spent in pausing, as you say, getting off the ball and focusing on the strategic, the horizon, what we can do to get prepared for it is really worthwhile. And what you observed at the start of this podcast, Rohan, is that is not now a single disciplinary event. That is a multidisciplinary conversation in an organisation. It's a great thing, right? There's different perspectives, different skill sets, different ways of analysing risk and responding to it. But it is less simple than it was before. I don't want to say it's complex for the sake of using the word complex, but it is challenging to get a sort of a read on this ahead of time. So all the time that people listening to this are investing in thinking about these events, I think is really well spent.
Nat, any final thoughts?
It is navigable though. It just does require that time. So there is playbooks in place that can be put in, and thinking that if that clarity of thought is there across the organisation, it can be done. So we're not saying this to sort of put the fear in people. It just requires the thinking. So I agree.
No, and I think, as you say, the work you invest, you actually get back.
Yeah.
Because one way or another, these issues are going to arise for you in 2026. And if you're ahead of it, you'll save a lot of time and angst.
Yep.
So there is a fair bit on the to-do list for 2026.
Always.
But thank you, Steve and Nat, for your contributions to that. And thank you to our listeners and watchers for joining us on Inside IR and employment and safety. I almost messed up that one.
No, it's all right. We would have got you.
We do love feedback on Inside IR, employment and safety, so please send that through. You can comment, direct message, send an email, insideir@hsfkramer.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time you join one of our podcasts.